want to show how to tie the Deer Hair Caddis. This is a very reliable yet simple fly to tie, though like any other pattern it's important that the correct material is selected to achieve the desired result and provide the finished fly we are looking for. Okay, so before we go on to tie the fly, it's worthwhile having a look at the different types of deer hair that are available. Like any fly tying material, with deer hair there are differences in the types that are available, in the properties that each of them have, in the desired use that we may have. So it's important that we have just a basic understanding of what we're looking for, what we're trying to achieve, so we can pick the material, the type of deer hair that's most appropriate for that purpose to help us ultimately to achieve the goal that we're after. Okay, so this is by no means meant to be a complete overview of all different types of deer hair. It's just an introduction to show you the kind of things we need to consider in the different types that are available. Some of the different types, I should say. So this is natural elk, and this is some deer belly hair. We've got some roe deer that's dyed orange. This is coastal deer hair. We've got some what's referred to as Comparadun hair, and some just referred to as short and fine deer hair. Okay, so what we'll do, we'll consider each of these in turn, and we'll look at the different characteristics that each of them has, the different properties, what we might use them for, and how we can get the best out of the different types of deer hair. Okay, so we'll start with this natural elk. Now, this is actually, elk is a different species of deer, so it is actually deer hair, although it's referred to and marketed as elk. This particular piece, you'll note that the fibres are quite long and straight, and they're quite pale in colour with a nice kind of fawn coloured tip in this case. The straight fibres are something that we need to look out for. It's really what we desire most when we're using deer hair. If you come to use a piece of deer hair that's got curved fibres, it's quite difficult to manage. You certainly can't, it's very difficult to straighten. We can't really straighten the fibres. So you want to really look for something that's got nice straight fibres like these. The elk hair that we're looking at, it's quite thick in texture, and you can see that the amount of splay and flare as I press on the pelt, there's a lot of kind of sponginess present. So these fibres will splay quite a lot when they're tied in. There's also something that on this pelt you can see that the actual pelt underneath, the skin is very flexible and malleable, because it's been well treated, well tanned, and that's something that's desirable, so that as you progress cutting the hair along the pelt, you can easily access the hair that you're looking for, basically. So that's something that's worth looking for. This elk is traditionally tied for the elk hair caddis, which has been modified to make the other CDC and elk variation, which is a very good caddis pattern. It's also used to tie the humpy patterns, which are a fly from the USA. It's an attractor pattern, tied with different coloured underbodies, yellow, red, orange, and so on, which is an attractor fly, and often it's quite good for bringing fish up from the deep. Okay, what we've got here, this is another piece of elk, but this illustrates another characteristic of the animal, which is the belly hair on deers is white, naturally white. Okay, and this piece indicates or illustrates the transition from the tan coloured flank going down onto the belly hair. So this is elk, and again it's got some nice, very dense and very spongy, lot of compression and flare available in these fibres, quite thick, but in this case with the nice white tips. So this can be used to tie a nice dry fly pattern, a nice sedge with a white coloured tip maybe. Yeah, so again it's got a nice kind of malleable pelt underneath, and that's another piece of elk there. Okay, this other piece that we've got, this is what we believe, this actually came from an unlabelled pack, and we believe this is also elk, but in this case we believe it's bull elk. Now the gender of the animal is also something that can affect the properties. You can see the differences in these two. Predominantly we're thinking this one's bull elk because of the darker colour, Bull elk is generally known for being a darker colour hair, basically. Okay, but again, the sponginess and the compression in these fibres lend itself to being suitable for spinning deer hair, for creating muddler heads and so on. And spinning is where we put it around the hook shank and then compress it with tight turns such that the fibres compress and they all splay out at 90 degrees pretty much to the hook shank. And we can use that for creating the deer hair bodies and so on that we use. Okay, so that's a quick overview of elk. We'll now take a quick look at some belly hair. Okay, we'll start with this natural white one. As I said earlier, the belly on the deer is naturally white. Okay, now the belly hair is known for being really quite thick. It's quite thick, the fibres in the hair, and they provide a lot of insulation. Okay, for the deer, where they're potentially lying down on cold ground and so on. It's the belly hair that provides a lot of insulation, so they're quite thick. That results in a fly when you use these fibres that's really quite buoyant. It'll have a good floatability. You can actually see on this piece as well, you might be able to make out just where it's touching onto the fawn colour on the edge. That's where the belly, again, where the belly's starting to meet the flank. I did mention before about the pelt being nice and soft. Quite often you might find on a piece of belly hair that's difficult to come by. The naturally white fibres, the process that they use to maintain that whiteness sometimes results in pelts that are quite stiff and quite not as easy to flex as some of the other pieces that you might be able to pick up. But yeah, the usage for these ones, again, because it's so thick and dense, it's very good for spinning deer hair bodies, or for producing the spun muddler heads and so on. I also use this particular piece for tying mayfly spinner bodies. Okay, on a pattern such as the deer stalker, where you take a few of these fibres and just tie them in loosely around the hook shank to produce a lovely mayfly body. So another note about the deer belly hair is that there's no tip markings on them. They are just plain white all the way along. And because there's no colour variation on the belly hair itself, that means that it lends itself well to being dyed, which is where we can see the likes of this red piece of dyed belly hair. So again, it's got the same kind of thickness and compression ability to make it useful for doing the deer heads and spinning and so on, muddler heads. But again, it's dyed red, so it's the white deer hair takes the dye really well. And again, this one, you can probably hear how the pelt itself is very hard in this case, because it's also been dyed as well. I suppose that's not really helped. There's another piece of dyed belly hair, this time fluorescent orange. And again, it's nice and thick, so that's going to produce a lovely either spun body or a muddler head, let's say. Okay, but this time this pelt's nice and soft, because it can vary across the different pieces that you get. So yeah, so it's often worth looking out for, that one. We'll now take a look at some roe deer. So roe deer is traditionally long and straight fibres that you'll get. It's quite common in the UK. The tips are quite marked on roe deer, and this one's actually dyed orange. Okay, but the actual the kind of size of the hair fibres, probably a bit more towards the medium side compared to the elk and compared to the belly hair. There is a degree of compression available and associated flare, and these roe deer is probably likely to be used for some larger caddis patterns. Again, all deer hair really can be used for muddler heads and spinning bodies and so on. But this one's also used, this particular one is for tying the still water pattern, the sedge hog, where we take multiple clumps of deer hair and we tie them in progressively along the hook shank to make a nice dry fly that floats well. And it's a very good still water pattern. Okay, so again, in this case, the pelt's nice and soft on this one, and it's a nice piece of roe deer. This is another piece of roe deer that we've got. This case, it's dyed olive. In this case, you can see again how much flare and how much sponginess and how much compression we've got available to us. So again, that's something else that's going to lend itself to making nice caddis patterns, larger caddis patterns probably, as well as doing the standard heads and spun deer bodies and so on. Okay, but again, you can see the nice marked tips that we've got on that piece of roe deer as well. We've got across here, this is now a piece of dyed roe deer, and you can probably make out how the tips have come out when it's been dyed. Okay, and this is kind of a bleached piece of roe deer, but again the fibers are nice and straight. Okay, this just shows a different color that you can pick up. Basically, this kind of fiber will be used on the likes of a stimulator pattern, which is a large attractor fly, dry fly, which sits on the water on the surface and often brings up some nice trout. Sometimes worth fishing clink and dink as well, or New Zealand style, I should say, with a nymph underneath it as well. Okay, but again, the pelt on that one's not too bad, nice and soft to allow access right through the pelt as you cut the fur away. Okay, so that's the roe deer. We'll now take a look at some Comparadun hair. Okay, coastal deer hair, I should say. The coastal deer hair is traditionally marketed for tying Comparaduns. The fibres are generally quite fine, but with not so much splay and flare, but so that you can create quite dense wings with them. But they will give it enough flare to spread out as needed for tying Comparaduns. So again, nice and straight fibres, which is what we're looking for, and it's quite marked tips on coastal deer hair. And again, you can see the pelt in this case is nice and soft again, allowing access right through. Also, you can see that the fibres are nice and even all the way through that piece that we've got there. Okay, that's a piece of coastal deer hair. I've got a piece of bleached coastal deer hair here. So the pelt's a little bit more stiff in this case, but again, on this one, you can probably make out that the fibres, the tips are a little bit more marked on this one, slightly longer tip markings on this one, although the fibres are probably about the same thickness, they're a little bit shorter in that case. So that's a bit of variation that you can get. Generally medium texture with well marked tips for caddis and Comparaduns, some dry flies. And there's another piece of darker coastal deer hair. Okay, again, nice and even, quite fine in texture, but again, of the right kind of got the right amount of compression available and flare available to tie the Comparadun patterns, as well as some small sedges as well. Okay, the Comparadun is a popular dry fly, and as a consequence, we have deer hair that's actually marketed as Comparadun deer hair. Okay, so this is a piece, and again, nice soft pelt. In this case, this is dyed dun colour, but again, you can see the fibres. They are probably about the same texture as the ones that we were looking at on the coastal deer hair, and again, it's quite widely available, coastal deer hair and this Comparadun hair. If these are the flies that you wish to tie, then you shouldn't have a problem picking up the right type of deer hair for those. Okay, this next piece is another option that's on the market, and this is sometimes just sold as all-purpose deer hair. It might even just be sold as deer hair itself. Okay, and this is one that I've come to favour, to be honest, because I like the kind of medium mid-range of this one. It's got mid-length fibres, but you'll notice that the actual the tips themselves are very short markings on the tips. Now, the thing that provides the buoyancy with deer hair, it's well known or well recognised that it's thought to be of a hollow structure. Okay, the fibre themselves. Now, whether the fibres themselves are actually hollow like a drinking straw, or whether they're more of a kind of honeycomb structure, is probably up for debate. But nonetheless, the thought is that they are in some degree hollow, and that's what provides the characteristic of them being that they can be compressed, and the resulting flare that occurs as a result of them being compressed. So that's a piece of all-purpose deer hair. Okay, what we'll look at now, this is another type that's on the market, which is referred to as short and fine deer hair. In this case, this is one that's bleached. Okay, and this is useful. It's like the one we saw before, the roe deer that was bleached. It is useful sometimes to pick up some bleached deer hair, because it allows you to tie flies that have got a lighter wing, whether it's a caddis pattern or a Comparadun. You may sometimes wish to tie flies that have this different colour, which is going to make them stand out better in darker shades of water, if you like. So yeah, so again, it's short and fine, and it's pretty much as it says. It is short and it is quite fine as well, but it is useful for tying smaller Comparaduns as well in this case. Okay, just one last piece that I want to look at before we go on to some of the techniques. This is a piece, just again, it's short deer hair, but something to note on this one is that the tips on this are also like on the all-purpose deer hair that I showed. The tips are really quite short. Now, some people have the feeling that the so-called hollowness of the fibres goes up to where the tips start to be coloured. Okay, so the likes of these fibres here, these have a lot of compression and a lot of buoyancy provided, all the way up to where those short, and because the tips are so shortly marked, it's something that ties a really nice Comparadun and a very buoyant caddis pattern again. So again, nice and even fibres right the way through. That's something that's important to get the fibres even all the way through, so that when you use it to tie a particular pattern, you're going to have repeatability and consistency of the fibres, and consequently that leads to consistency in the flies that you're going to tie, which of course is going to lead to tying better flies and allow you to gain confidence as you go along using the material. So yeah, so that's a nice piece of deer hair, that one. Okay, so what we'll do now, we'll take a quick look at how we actually approach retrieving the fibres from the pelt. Okay, now there's an important characteristic that we need to be aware of with deer hair. I'm just stroking back here some of the what's called underfur. Okay, so you can probably see that protruding out, and it's this soft underfur, and that is something that's going to potentially get in the way of when we tie a fly. And what we need to do is basically have in mind how we can actually deal with it. Okay, so what I'm going to do first of all, I'm just going to cut some hair off this pelt. Okay, and firstly, to do this, what we do, it's always recommended, as it certainly is as first practice, to cut the hair close to the pelt, as I've done there. Okay, the reason for that is that as you go further into the pelt, you'll be able to access the deer hair at a short level. Okay, so what I've just done, I've cut the fur off the pelt. Okay, but what's happened basically, it's cut off it's taken with it the underfur. Okay, now to get rid of the underfur, what we have to do is use a fur comb. okay? And we just take it through with a few combs, turn the fur around as you go. And it will take out a few fibres, okay? I'm holding it nice and tight. But you can probably see how it's removed the underfur, okay? So what that now means is, let's just do maybe a little bit more there, just get rid of that. That now means that this clump that I've got is now free of the underfur, okay? So what I'm now able to do, I'll just get rid of some of these little fibres. I'm now able to circle this into the stacker, okay? Drop it down, and then you'd be able to stack away, okay? And there you go. So this, you can probably see there that the fibres are nice and well stacked. Okay, so that's how you deal with the underfur. Okay, so what I'll do now, I'll just show how we do that for the deer hair caddis that we're going to tie. Okay, so I'll take a pinch of fibres, what I feel to be the right amount. Okay, so I can see there's a little bit of underfur there which I need to get rid of. Okay, so I've got rid of that. What I can now do is again just circle them in. Okay, drop them into the stacker. Okay, a few taps, and then that's done. Okay, and they're nicely stacked. Okay, so that's that'll take us on to the to tying the deer hair caddis. Just one more point to note before we do is about the underfur. Okay, now the underfur on an animal actually it increases throughout at different times of the year, basically. So if you take a piece of deer skin from an animal that's been culled early in the season, you may find it has little or even no underfur. So this piece of all-purpose hair that I've got here, there's not a great deal of underfur showing there, whereas this piece of roe deer, as I showed before, there's a lot of underfur showing on that. So that's likely to be from later on in the season when it was culled. Now, you're unlikely in the UK to be able to choose, I want an early season piece of deer hair, but nonetheless you may well find that if you're able to view the deer hair before you purchase it, that it's something you can potentially look for. And if you see a piece with a lot of underfur, it might be a piece that you may wish not to choose. Otherwise, it's just something to be aware of. There are ways that you can manage it. It just takes a little bit of time, that's all, to look after it. Also, the actual markings on the tips vary throughout the year, whereas an early season animal will potentially have shorter tips, whereas a late season animal will have less colour shown in the tips, potentially. So yeah, so there you go. So there's an overview of some of the different types of deer hair that we've got. Okay, just to give you a brief introduction to the different characteristics that the different types have, so that you're aware and you're able to make a choice as to what most suits the flies that you're tying. So let's now move on, and we'll continue to tie the deer hair caddis. Okay, this is a deer hair caddis. It's very simple, effective fly, which generally ticks all the boxes. It's very easy to tie, and it's effective. Two basic materials. Dubbing is Orvis Hair's Ice Dub in brown, and then there's a plain deer hair wing. The thread is Vivus 80 in olive. You can also tie it with a black dubbing and with black thread. It's also effective in that way, and fished anywhere from generally about 14 up to an 18 my side, but it's a very effective fly when caddis are hatching. Sometimes I also wonder whether fish take this fly in precedence of hatching olives, even preference. But nonetheless, it's certainly worth having some of these in your box. So we just start around halfway down the shank. All we do is very simply dub on a nice body. So just grab some redubbing. Put this on. Okay, so we just start just touching on the bend, just a little bit down around the bend a touch. Leave a gap towards the eye of the hook, and then we just want to get rid of this last little bit of dubbing that we've got there. Now, this last point here, this is where we need to tie in the deer hair, and this is where the little bit of a tip comes in really. What we want to do is prevent the deer hair from spinning around the hook, and because we're tying in such a clump of deer hair, that can be a bit tricky if you don't know what to do. Now, probably the slippiest thing that we could put the deer hair straight onto is a hook shank. So number one, the hook shank has to be covered in thread. Okay, what I tend to do on top of that is use some wax. Okay, and this is some wax that was put together by one of our members based on a recipe that was provided by one of the guest tyers that we had. It's got some rosin and beeswax and some other things in it as well. I'm not sure of the exact makeup, but it's a very good wax, a solid wax. Now the trick that I use here is you can't quite see it with the perspective, but there's maybe an inch, maybe 3/4 of an inch of thread bare. And now I'm only waxing between the hook eye and the bobbin holder. Okay, now I know that all of that thread has been waxed. Okay, and what I'm now going to do is wind this all the way down until I've used up all of that waxed thread. I'm just going to pull off that little bit of stray dubbing that we've got all the way down to that, and that's where I know that. So that's all waxed thread there. Okay, if I was to go over it with 3 or 4 more turns, the actual thread that I've got there would not be waxed, and I'd be basically undoing the effect that I'm trying to do. Okay, so that's now ready to have the deer hair placed on it, and you can see I've left the thread just at the end of the dub body. Okay, so now I've got the deer hair that's all prepped. I'll just give it a couple of more taps just to make sure we're good to go. And you can see it's all nice and level in my stacker. I'll gently tease it out, and now this is the business end now. So I'm now squeezing it, and from experience I know roughly what I'm looking for, and that's not too far off. There's a few little wayward pieces there that could cause me a bit of upset as I'm tying the wing in. What I'm looking for is for the back of the wing to be level with the back end of the bend of the hook, which is round about there. Okay, and now I'm going to do multiple pinching loops here to tie in this deer hair. Okay, so the first one goes in, and it's just a gradual draw up and let the deer hair flare. Release pressure slightly between your finger and thumb. Now I've done, I brought it down, and then it's a little snap now. I snap it down with my fingers and draw it up, and then snap it back down and draw it up and pull in the tension. Snap down, draw it up. 5, 6, and 7. Now the trick that I've done there, I hope you could see it. What I was doing, I was quite forcefully snapping down the pinching loop on the downward stroke, and what that does, it lays the thread exactly in position over the previous pinching loop, and that's how I've managed to achieve such a tight layer. You saw well, if you count, I'm pretty sure I counted 7 pinching loops, one after the other, And you can see for the 7 wraps, they've all pretty much gone bang, one on top of the other there, very tightly. There is a splay of maybe a couple of turns, okay? But on the whole, it's they're pretty much bang on, one on top of the other. What I'm now going to do is just trim this down to make my little, the head of the fly. That's the fly pretty much done. All I need to do now is the whip finish. 3 turns, 2 and 3. Okay, and now this is what I've just done there by tightening the whip finish. Sometimes that's the proof of the pudding, because sometimes it's when you actually tighten the whip finish, that's where you'll see the deer hair spin around the shank. If you've not got it, the 2 things that we need, which are the waxed thread underneath and the pinching loops nice and tight, one on top of the other. Okay, so there's just one little leg that's got away from me a little bit there. Okay, what I'll do now, I'll just drop a little bit of varnish on, because it's going to be fish, this fly, certainly. A little bit on one side, let it run in, and then the other side as well. Just turn my needle around. Okay. And I can see I haven't turned the fly around. I've also got a little bit of a little errant stub there, so that's got rid of that one. So there you have it. It's a very effective fly. As I say, it's a size 16. That can be fished in a 14, 16 or 18 I tend to use myself. Couple of little additional points. It's useful to make sure you stay clear of the eye, because these can be a bit tricky if you don't keep that eye clear, and if you end up too close to the eye with the whip finish, these butts can go right down over the eye, and it can be really challenging to actually thread the eye of the hook, so you need to give yourself a decent bit of room there. The other point is sometimes these can be quite tricky to see on the river, so what you might want to do is add a little sighter, maybe an Antron sighter just on the top, only a small piece. Don't put it too big, otherwise it'll be potentially visible from the sides, which you may not want. It may affect the actual performance of the fly. Okay, but on the whole, that's a fantastic caddis pattern. I've used it for many years, fishing for trout and rivers, and on still waters as well. It's also a really good fly to keep in your box.